prayer about Paul's procedure. He's going to have his heart shot tomorrow. They wanted to do it today, but he couldn't arrange that, so it's going to be tomorrow. Isaiah chapter 13. In the first 16 verses is a section dealing with the destruction of Babylon. That Isaiah is looking far into the future, past the time of the world power at that time, which was Assyria, to the time past the time they were destroyed, and Babylon rises to power, and now then they're being destroyed. So this is quite a ways into the future. We'd gotten down to verse 15 last week, and so wanted to begin there this evening. It says that everyone that is found shall be thrust through, and everyone that is joined unto them shall fall by the sword. Basically, as they try to escape, the ones that are found are going to be killed by the sword. So basically, it is a total destruction. The word joined, and I didn't look in New King James or the American Standard. Anybody have those? And what's that New King James have instead of joined? That everyone is joined unto them.
Everyone is found to be
taken is found. It is a couple of Hebrew lexicons. We're probably familiar a lot more so with Thayer's. He is a Greek lexicon, or has a Greek lexicon. Well, one that is a Hebrew lexicon is Gesenius, and he defines it as withdrawing himself into his house or hiding in his house. Another one that's abbreviated HAL, it's Hebrew Aramaic language, has to be carried off, that is, to be snatched out of a fleeing crowd of people. So that's the actual definition of this word, everyone that is the word joined there. Joined unto them shall fall by the sword. Other lexicons would have similar ideas to those two definitions. So basically anyone that's associated with them, as they try to escape, whether it's as Gesenius has, hiding in his house, or hiding in the house, fleeing out of a crowd of people, they're going to die by the sword. So, again, Isaiah just showing the totality of the destruction that's going to come, how all of them are going to be put to death. Verse 16 continues with that. Their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses shall be spoiled, and their wives ravished. In other words, this carnage will be such that no one is spared. Even their parents will see their children killed. dashed to pieces. Someone turn over to the 137th Psalm and read verses 8 and verse 9 for us. Psalm 137, verses 8 and verse 9. Okay. That's New King James. Dashes their little ones against the rocks. Is that how it was?
That happened to the Jews during World War II. They start crying, they take and smash them up against the thing and throw them over the rest of the dead people.
The cruelty of man sometimes knows no boundaries. We live in a society today that is repulsed by those type of things. If you go back and just read the Old Testament, it was something that was very common. That was what took place. We think it's just way out of line. They didn't. Yeah.
Some of the citizens may be repulsed by it, but a whole swath of society takes part in partial abortion, and you might call it regular abortion, if you want to call it that. I don't know what you call it.
We'll get to that later on, another aspect of it. But you see the cruelty of man a lot of times if you look at Islamic states or nations. The cruelty that they have in relationship to especially women. And then the liberals, of course, want to bring them over here to the United States. But you look at Sharia law, and they go by that, and it's not any problem to them. But as you view those things, and we view them with horror and just repulsed by it, back in these days, Old Testament days, that was common. The cruelty was far greater than what we imagine today. And so here, the children dashed to pieces, dashed against the rocks, just and the houses are spoiled, everything's taken, and their wives ravished. Now then, I'm not sure, I didn't check what the others state, but basically that is a nice way of saying they're raped. So that's the situation as far as what's going to be taking place. The destruction of Babylon. In verses 17 through verse 22 then, I title this section Some Particulars of Babylon's Destruction. Verse 17, Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver. As for gold, they shall not delight in it. So God now tells us who he is going to use to bring this devastation against Babylon and this destruction. He's going to stir up the Medes. So that's who he's going to use. And he says, They don't regard silver or gold. In other words, they can't be bribed. Babylon had great treasures. They weren't interested in it. That's what he's saying. All of these treasures that Babylon had, the riches that it had, they weren't interested in that. And just think, you remember Belteshazzar, and first going back even before, they had brought all of the gold and silver that was in Jerusalem to Babylon, which all of the gold there was just amazing. So now then Babylon had all of that, and on the night in which the handwriting on the wall took place, they were using the golden utensils from the temple from Jerusalem. Now that's just from Jerusalem, if you think about that. But here they are, a world empire, so they've taken money from all of the nations, all of their riches and wealth. And he's saying, Medes don't care anything about that. Homer Haley wrote of the Medes, and quote, Media lay south and southwest of the Caspian Sea, north of the Zagros Mountains. Cyrus of the Elamite province of Anshan came to the throne about 549 BC, thus uniting the Medes and the Persians. In 539 BC, Cyrus and his army took the city of Babylon, whose citizens received him as a liberator. The buildings of the city were left intact, but Babylon's political and military power was brought to an end. End quote. So that tells you a little bit about the background of the Medo-Persian Empire. It was united under Cyrus, Cyrus the Great. He gives the date 539 BC. I've always heard 538 BC. And if anybody wants to debate the dates of those times, go right ahead. I have no interest in it. Because it's all a matter of who you read. So he is the one who united the Medo-Persian Empire. And then they took the city of Babylon without having to destroy it. And in reality, they're going to remain there for a while and use that as one of their capital cities. In verse 18 then, their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. So the cruelty of the Medes is noted here by the dealing purely or all totally in this verse with the destruction of the young men and children. When it says their bows, the Persians were particularly skilled at using the bow, so that's why Isaiah is now prophesying their bows. And again, you think of the accuracy of what Isaiah is writing here hundreds of years before it takes place. amazing accuracy. Those who predict things today, see if they'll predict things like this with such accuracy. And then those who attempt such, see what their success rate is. Because it's not very good. They don't have that capability. The only way to account for the accuracy that Isaiah sets forth here is that he is writing by the inspiration of God. No only way to account for it. Bill, was that a raising your hand or just scratching your nose? Okay. I caught the last part of it, so. And Isaiah says here it will go so far, their cruelty will go so far that they will not even have pity on the fruit of the womb. This is dealing with the unborn. Now then, Dale, what you were saying in relationship to the abortion that takes place in our nation would be applicable to this. And it also, because we see the way in which it's worded, it would refer to the personhood of the child in the womb. For years and years, maybe I should say decades, we had the big argument whether that which was in the womb was a human being or not. That's pretty much been conceded now. They don't even argue such. Just that they have the right to do it. Every once in a while you'll still see it argued as to, well, it's just a blob of tissue or something like that. The Bible recognizes the humanity of the person that is within the womb. Calls it by the exact same term as a baby that's outside the womb. Makes no distinction between inside and outside. We could go through all of the different various arguments, but in reality, everybody knows that which is within the womb is human. You cannot really escape that. Our courts recognize it. Okay, Dale, since you're about to.
Baby leaped in the womb when Mary.
Okay, and Luke 2, the babe leaped in her wombs, and later on, a babe outside of the womb, it uses the same term. That's correct. That's why I said the Bible states the same thing as one inside the womb and outside the womb. Well, some of them do, though. And that's the odd thing. If an individual or a woman on her own, not going to abortion clinic or Planned Parenthood or any of those things, she'll go to jail, won't she? Either way, if she aborts the baby or does something intentionally on her own, then she can go to jail. And they have gone to jail. Why? If she can go down to the abortion clinic and get an abortion and it be legal. You see, that's why I say our laws actually recognize that which is in the womb is human. If someone kills a woman that has a child in the womb, many times those who commit that murder are convicted of a double homicide. Why? Because the court recognizes that within the womb is human. Now then, our laws, of course, don't make any sense, because then you turn around and say the abortion and the abortion doctor has the right to kill it. Or really the better term would say to murder it. But Isaiah here is recognizing the personhood of that child that's in the womb. And, say from a legal standpoint, but you could also say from a scientific standpoint, obviously it is human. From every aspect that you can approach it, that which is within the womb is human. And thus, killing that would be murder. There's really... the problem is that we don't really have that much respect for life anymore. That's where the real problem resides. That's why someone who's older, you can just do away with them, and they call it euthanasia. Know what the meaning of euthanasia is?
Mercy killing.
No, not technically. It's made up of two parts, both from the Greek. The root word is thanatos, in the Greek, which means death, translated death. The prefix would be the EU, euthanasia. EU would be good or blessed. So it literally is good death. Think about that. What? Well, that's anyone who they consider is a burden on society, anyone who they consider, has reached an age or a time in which they cannot, as others think, contribute to society, or they become a burden in the sense that it costs too much for their care or all of these other things, then we can give them a good death by murdering them. That's literally what we're doing. But you see it on that side. You see it in regards to abortion. That shows the lack of respect for human life. If you look on the streets today and think about all of the murders that take place, and you see people don't respect life. It doesn't mean anything to them anymore.
That's what that movie Soylent Green was about, euthanized people. You could go down and they would, of course they turned them into food, but that's what it was about. They felt like it was too sickly, they go down and they had a special thing they put you in. It was sort of like that chamber that I've seen now, that's shaped like a cocoon. You can go in there and close the door, soft music, and then they gradually put you to sleep when you die.
Yeah.
But in the movie, they took them out and foods.
Well, if you're going to kill them, you might as well use the body for something. Since you mentioned movies, I remember a movie years ago that I saw where, and I don't remember what they called it or anything like that, but at 30 years of age, that's when they killed everybody. What? I don't remember the name of the movie. This was probably 30, 40 years ago that I saw that.
This movie was back in the 70s. It was before all the blood and gore.
They died.
They didn't chop them up.
The one I'm thinking of, they would float up into the sky and zap them out of existence. And then a Star Trek episode that I saw just the other day. A man was doing something, and he had to go home because he was turning 60, and at the age of 60 he had to basically kill himself. That was his obligation. Continued disrespect of life. And well, didn't want to get into those aspects. It just it's all over. Whether you're talking about Chicago, Baltimore, or any other city, you can look at Pensacola and you see it. That's it. It's the gun that's killing them, not the person. And amazing that we had those guns, when y'all were growing up. I wasn't even thought of then, but when y'all were growing up and they had them in the back of their trucks when they came to school, it was something that everybody had and they were common. And all of those guns killed people, right? You didn't have the problem. Why? Because people were taught respect for life. And today they're not taught that, and so we have the problems that we see today. Getting back to this, basically Isaiah is saying these Medes have no respect for the Babylonians' life. They're going to just wipe everybody out, even those who are in the womb they're going to kill. And yes, I know we could talk about the evils of all of these things all night long probably, but we all know the principles. When you start teaching people the principles of respect for life, then you can bring about change. Until you teach that, you're never going to bring about any change, not any real change. And Henry mentioned it's the gun that does it. You can enact all of the laws that you want. You can take away all of the firearms that you might want. You'll still have the problems. They will still kill them. Then they'll have to take away all the knives. Then all the hammers. You do realize that even today there are more killed by knives than there are guns. Why? Because the problem of respect for life. It's not the gun, it's not the instrument, it's the person that does it because they don't respect life. And since we got off on this, I'll add this as well. Capital punishment. Some have even argued, if you're for capital punishment, then don't tell me anything about abortion because, well, capital punishment comes as a respect for life. The person has done something because they do not respect life, and because they do not respect people's lives, God has authorized putting them to death. If you read the Old Testament, notice how many times He commands them to put someone to death. It is pretty gruesome. A lot of the times that took place with foreign dignitaries, but I was talking specifically about the sins that are mentioned in the Old Testament, of which God says, if you do these things, take them out and stone them. There's over 20 different things that God mentions in the Old Testament that were offenses that brought about the death penalty. Now then, should we learn anything from that? Well, if we don't, then we're not using the Old Testament properly, are we? In Romans 13 and verse 4, it says concerning the government that it does not bear the sword in vain. What's the sword's use? You mean it's not to just pat him on the head with the sword and say, go be nice now. No, the sword was an instrument of death. And so he's saying that the government, in its responsibility that it has the responsibility to execute those individuals who do evil.
God instituted the first death penalty in the Garden of Eden.
He did.
He said, in the day you eat, you'll die.
You shall, or literally dying, ye shall die. Ye shall surely die, as it's translated. So God instituted it. And then I think it's chapter 9 and verse 6, that he who takes a person's life, his life is to be taken. Death penalty. Why? Because that individual did not respect life, and God expected us to respect life. So, the respect of life is for both those who are living and those who are put to death because they failed to respect that life. And to teach people then to respect life, you execute those individuals. Okay, verse 19 then. He says, in Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Babylon prided herself in being the glory of kingdoms. They were the greatest, the most glorious, the highest. Just think of Nebuchadnezzar as he goes out and he looks at everything and he starts priding himself. Look at all that I've done. Look at how great this is. And of course, God humbled him, but that was their pride. They looked at everything and we are the best of the best. We're the greatest. Of course, go back a few years before that to when Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And Daniel interpreted that dream and said, you are the head of gold. Oh, don't you think that by itself kind of brought about a little bit of pride and glory of kingdoms? We're over all of the kingdoms. So they were described as the glory of kingdoms. Now, how did Isaiah know this before they were anything, really? Inspiration. The capital actually was first mentioned in Genesis 10 and verse 10. When it says, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. there's your first mention of Babylon, the city of Babylon, here the shortened form Babel. So that's the first mention of it. That's how ancient the city goes and how far back it goes. Noah Hackworth wrote this, quote, "The city alleged became the mistress of Babylonia under King Hammurabi about 2000 BC. The political and religious center of the country, the city reportedly reached the height of its glory in the 6th century BC under Nebuchadnezzar, but all of the city's so-called luster and glory was about to depart forever. Such a fate could only come about as a result of divine decree," end quote. So here's, it goes back to Hammurabi, King Hammurabi. Have you ever heard of Hammurabi's code? What was it? Anybody remember? Code of Hammurabi. It was basically a stone obelisk in which was engraved the laws of that time that Hammurabi had given. Became one of the great archaeological finds that we have found. That was 2000 BC. By the way, just as a kind of an aside here, when did Moses live? About what was his date?
1500 close to it.
Around 1500 BC. This would be 500 years older than Moses. Now, the reason I mention that, back years ago, long time ago, they argued that Moses could not have written the Pentateuch. Want to know why? No writing. That is exactly right. They did not know how to write then. They had no way in which to write. 500 years before Moses, though, you've got this now writing on this stone obelisk, the Code of Hammurabi. Kind of destroys that theory. You don't hear it anymore now because it's been destroyed. But, as I say, that's kind of an aside. That is what, sadly, that is what some would answer. Aliens. But you're right. They have done a total opposite. I can remember when I was young thinking, people back then were dumb and, the caveman. They can't deny these things. Of course, one of the great things that brought about a reversal of those things, how did they build the pyramids? And they didn't have the modern technological utensils and mechanical things that we have today. How did they move those huge, great stones? And, It was manpower, but they were pretty smart as to how they would have had to do that and accomplish it. Okay, that's one that I'm not familiar with, but so Paul, now then you know where to take her.
He only weighed 120 pounds. He never would let anybody know how he did it. And that thing is so balanced, it weighs 2 or 3 tons. You can touch it with your finger and it'll.
Well, that does sound amazing, but the point is, they were pretty smart. They had a lot of intelligence. But there's the Code of Hammurabi, 2000 BC. Laws written by and at that time. So now then, Babylon's going to be destroyed. It's going to be such a total devastation. It's going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, that's recorded for us, of course, in Genesis chapters 18 and 19. Sodom and Gomorrah, how was it destroyed? Fire and brimstone descending from heaven. So that's the way Babylon's going to be destroyed, right? No. Okay. The method is different. The completeness of the destruction is similar. And so that's the comparison that he's making, to say that there's going to be fire and brimstone coming out of heaven to destroy it. Well, that's overreaching with the figure that he's using. He's using the figure Sodom and Gomorrah to show the completeness of it, not the method of it. So we'll start with verse 20 then, Lord willing, next week.